It was a bright and ordinary Tuesday morning in the suburban mall, a place that usually buzzed with the hum of shoppers and families. The sound of children laughing echoed from the food court, while store employees hurried to restock shelves and clean their windows. Everything seemed like it always did, and for most people, the day appeared to be another usual one. But for Gina Walker, the mall manager, things weren't as smooth as they seemed. Gina had worked at the mall for nearly 12 years. She had seen it all: new stores opening, old stores closing, and countless faces passing by without a second glance. She was the steady hand behind the scenes, solving problems and managing the day-to-day activities. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. And she was good at it. Today, like every other day, she was running through her to-do list. The escalator in the East Wing was broken again, and it had caused a few complaints from annoyed customers. The security footage showed a small incident of shoplifting in one of the boutiques. Nothing too serious, but enough to keep her busy. She sighed as she pushed her hair back into a ponytail. It was becoming harder to keep track of everything that needed fixing. The mall was big, and there was always something. She glanced at the clock. It was 10:30 a.m., and it seemed like the usual rush was starting to die down. The store clerks had started to relax, sipping their coffees and chatting with each other. Gina, however, couldn't afford such luxuries. She still had a mountain of paperwork waiting in her office. As she moved toward the back hallway, she noticed a man walking into the mall. He was tall, maybe around 6 feet, with a build that suggested he took care of himself. His dark jeans and plain black t-shirt gave off a casual, almost nonchalant vibe. But it wasn't his outfit that caught her attention. No, it was the red MAGA hat sitting squarely on his head. Gina didn't have time to think too much about it. Her eyes quickly scanned the rest of the mall. It was typical to see all sorts of people walking around, some dressed in strange ways, others with very unique accessories. But there was something about this man that stood out. Maybe it was the confident way he walked, or the quiet energy he gave off, like he didn't need to impress anyone. She felt a small nagging feeling at the back of her mind, but quickly dismissed it. There were more important matters to focus on. She had a mall to manage. Customers had to be satisfied, and the escalator still needed fixing. But something about that hat bothered her. It wasn't that she had a strong opinion one way or the other about the politics of it. It was just that the red hat seemed like a symbol, a statement, and there was something about that which unsettled her. She turned away and walked toward the security office. She had made a mental note to check in on the mall's cameras after hearing a few more complaints about the escalator. Maybe she could get someone to fix it today, if she could squeeze it into her busy schedule. As she passed through the busy corridors of the mall, she tried to block out the nagging thoughts about the man with the hat. After all, she had enough to deal with. The mall had been having some problems recently. Business was a little slower than usual, and rumors were spreading about the mall possibly being sold to a new owner. It made things feel uncertain, and Gina wasn't sure how she felt about it. She had worked hard for years to build a reputation as the reliable, dependable manager. But with these rumors of a new owner, there was a sense of unease hanging in the air. What would happen to her job? What would happen to the mall? Would everything change overnight? She pushed the thoughts aside. It wasn't time to worry about that now. She had more immediate problems to solve. As the hours passed, the mall continued to buzz with life. The food court was busy, with families grabbing snacks and teenagers hanging out in groups. Store employees were making their rounds, tidying up the stores, while the security team made sure everything ran smoothly. Gina continued her rounds as well, stopping by each store to check in with the managers. Everything seemed to be running fine, but the feeling of unease from earlier hadn't gone away. She glanced at the clock. It was 11:45 now, and that's when she saw him again. The man in the red MAGA hat. This time, he was near one of the mall's high-end stores, walking casually through the hall. She tried not to pay too much attention, but again, something about him caught her eye. There was a group of teenagers laughing nearby, and they seemed to be making fun of him. Their giggles were quiet but unmistakable, and Gina saw them glance over at him with judgmental eyes. She couldn't help it, she stepped closer. She wasn't sure why, but something told her to keep an eye on him. Maybe it was because of the way he carried himself. Maybe it was just instinct. She had seen so many people come and go in the mall, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this man was different. Then, without warning, one of the teenagers shouted out at him. "Hey, nice hat, Grandpa." The comment was rude, but the man didn't react. He didn't even turn his head. Instead, he just kept walking, his pace steady. Gina didn't like the way the kids were acting, but she wasn't sure if it was her place to intervene. She was just the manager, after all. Her job was to keep the peace, not to get involved in people's personal issues. However, as she continued to watch, she saw something unusual. The man didn't just ignore the comment. He seemed to be listening. Almost as if he was paying attention to everything happening around him in a way that most people wouldn't. Gina wasn't sure why, but it made her feel even more uneasy. By now, the mall was getting a little quieter. It was almost noon, and most of the morning rush was over. The stores were still busy, but things had slowed down a little. Gina decided to stop by her office for a quick break. She needed to catch up on some paperwork. As she passed through the main hallway, she caught sight of the man again. This time, he was standing by the large, glass-walled office of the mall's management team. The door was open, and Gina could see several people sitting around a table. They were talking quietly, but when they saw the man standing there, their conversation seemed to stop. Gina felt a strange feeling creep up her spine. What was going on? Why was he standing there, and why did the people in the office seem so surprised to see him? She walked by, trying to act casual. But she couldn't help the feeling that something was off. She made her way to the security office to check on the cameras, hoping to take her mind off the strange encounter. But the image of that man with the red hat stayed with her. She didn't know it yet, but this ordinary Tuesday was about to turn into something much more complicated than she could ever have imagined. Little did Gina know, the man with the MAGA hat wasn't just any ordinary customer. And today would not be just another day at the mall. Gina Walker had worked at the mall for 12 long years. She had seen it all, the opening of new stores, the closing of old ones, the shifting trends in fashion, and the rise and fall of different customer groups. Over those years, she had built a reputation as a reliable manager. She was the person everyone went to when things needed to get done, and she took pride in that. Her role was clear, and she did it well. But lately, things had started to feel different. For the past few months, rumors had been swirling around the mall. Whispers of new ownership echoed through the break room like an unsettling breeze. People were talking about changes, about how the mall was going to be restructured, how fresh faces were coming in to replace the old ones. And those changes? They hadn't reached Gina. The mall was still running like it always had. But in the back of her mind, Gina couldn't shake the feeling that things were starting to change without her. And she didn't like it. Her team was looking to her for leadership, but the higher ups, those who made the big decisions, hadn't bothered to sit her down and explain what was really going on. No one had filled her in on the details, and she could feel the tension building around her. Every day, there was a little more gossip in the hallways, a little more uncertainty. At first, Gina thought it was just the normal chatter that happened when things felt out of balance. The mall had been around for years, and it was only natural that some new management would come in eventually. But the whispers had grown louder, and now, even the customers seemed to notice. They'd say things like, "I heard this place is getting sold," or "Have you noticed how weird things are around here lately?" But no one had asked Gina for her opinion. No one had come to her for advice. She felt like a small cog in a big machine, and the machine was turning without her. It had started to take a toll on her. As Gina strolled through the food court, trying to clear her head, she couldn't help but overhear the murmurs from the customers sitting at the tables. She had taken a few minutes to step away from her usual responsibilities, hoping for some peace. The noise of the mall was always constant, people chatting, kids running around, food being served, but right now, it felt like it was closing in on her. It wasn't that the food court was unusually loud or busy. In fact, it was a fairly quiet day. But as she passed by the tables, Gina couldn't help but notice the strange looks that some of the customers were giving the man with the red MAGA hat. The man had been sitting at a table by himself for some time. He didn't seem to be in a hurry. His posture was relaxed, but there was something about his stillness that made him stand out. Gina's eyes lingered on him for a moment. He didn't seem to be bothering anyone, but there was an air of arrogance around him. It wasn't that he was openly rude or loud, it was something subtler. It was his presence. Gina had seen people come and go, but this man carried himself differently. There was a sense of quiet confidence in the way he sat, as if he didn't need anyone's approval. And the hat, bold and red, only added to that feeling of superiority. As she walked past the tables, she heard some muttering behind him. She could barely make out the words, but she knew what they were talking about. A few customers were clearly making fun of him. Some were whispering to each other, their glances directed at his hat. It was nothing too loud, but Gina could tell that he was the topic of their conversation. Her curiosity got the best of her, and she slowed her pace just a little. "Who does he think he is?" one of the women at a nearby table said quietly. Her voice was barely audible, but Gina could hear it perfectly. "Probably just another one of those people who thinks the rules don't apply to him," another woman added with a sarcastic laugh. Gina felt a slight discomfort in the pit of her stomach. It wasn't the man himself that bothered her, it was the way others were reacting to him. People who didn't even know him were already passing judgment. It was as though they had already decided who he was, just based on the way he looked. Gina wasn't sure why, but she felt like she needed to step in. Maybe it was the way he had been sitting there so calmly, as if he had no care for the whispers around him. Or maybe it was because, deep down, she didn't like the idea of people being treated unfairly, even if they didn't deserve it. She glanced over at the security desk, and the guard was busy with something. It was the perfect time for her to handle this herself. She took a deep breath and walked over to the table where the man sat. "Excuse me, sir," she began, her voice calm but firm. Her steps were deliberate as she approached him. She had handled plenty of situations like this before, people who were causing disruptions, people who didn't understand the rules. She was used to confrontation. But something about this man was different. When she spoke, he didn't immediately look up. He just continued to stare straight ahead. It wasn't until she cleared her throat that he slowly glanced in her direction. His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, she felt an odd shift in the air between them. There was something calculating in his gaze, something that made her pause for a moment. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," Gina continued, trying to keep her voice steady. "We don't allow that kind of attire in the mall." She didn't know why she said it. The words just came out, almost without thinking. She could feel her heart rate pick up slightly as she waited for his response. His expression didn't change much. He didn't seem angry or upset, just amused. He didn't even flinch when she spoke. "Really?" he asked, his voice soft but with an edge of disbelief. "You want me to leave because of a hat?" Gina's patience started to wear thin. She had seen people try to argue about the rules before, but something about his calmness was getting under her skin. "Yes," she said again, a little more firmly this time. "It's mall policy." No political statements allowed. I'm afraid you'll have to leave. The man took a deep breath and sighed, looking around the food court as if he was considering his options. There was a small smirk on his face, and it was starting to bother Gina. It wasn't a smirk of defiance or anger, it was a smirk of someone who knew they were in control. "All right, if you insist," he said, standing up from his seat. His voice was casual, almost as if he were indulging her. Gina watched as he slowly picked up his bag, slinging it over his shoulder. He wasn't in a hurry. There was no rush in his movements, no sign of frustration or resistance. It was as though he had expected this and was playing along with her. She turned away, already feeling a little bit of tension leaving her body as he walked away. But as she watched him leave the food court, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling in her gut. Something wasn't right. She didn't know who this man was or what he wanted, but the situation felt off. Gina had done her job. She had enforced the rules. But there was something about the way the man had reacted that made her wonder if she had done the right thing. The day slowly dragged on, each hour passing in a haze of normality and routine. The hustle and bustle of the mall had resumed after the brief incident with the man in the MAGA hat. Yet, despite the flow of customers, something felt off in the air. Gina's decision to ask the man to leave had been quick and professional. She had done her job, enforcing the mall's policies without hesitation. But as the day wore on, whispers spread through the hallways. Word traveled fast in the mall. It wasn't just customers who gossiped, the staff, too, couldn't help but discuss the strange encounter. In the break room, the conversation buzzed as loudly as the espresso machine. "Did you see that guy?" Carla, one of the younger employees, asked as she helped herself to a sandwich. "The one with the hat. She just kicked him out." "I know, right," replied Malik, the mall security guard. "It's crazy. What's with the hat anyway? I thought it was some political thing. Who wears a hat like that in a place like this?" Gina wasn't sure how to feel about the gossip. Part of her wanted to ignore it and focus on the task at hand. She had a responsibility, after all, and she couldn't let herself get distracted by petty talk. But another part of her couldn't help but listen, and deep down, she felt a growing unease. What if she had made a mistake? At first, Gina had brushed off the incident. She had told herself she was just doing her job. But as she moved through the mall, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. The whole situation had left an impression on her, one that wouldn't easily fade. As the hours passed, her thoughts returned to the man with the MAGA hat. He had seemed so calm, so unfazed by her request. Most people would have argued, maybe even gotten angry. But he hadn't. He had simply agreed and walked away. Why was that? Why had he acted so nonchalant? Gina felt that tug again, that strange pull in her gut. She had seen his face before. She was sure of it. But where? She racked her brain, trying to place it. Had they crossed paths before? Had he come into the mall before, maybe under a different guise? There was something familiar about his eyes, his posture, the way he moved. Her mind raced, but the answer eluded her. Later, as she passed by the high-end store on the mall's upper level, she noticed something out of the corner of her eye. The glass-walled office of the shopping center's executives was busy with people. It was rare for the office to have such a gathering of figures, especially not in the middle of the day. Gina had always thought the executive office was a place of private meetings, a space where decisions were made behind closed doors. But now, there were people standing in the hall, and their murmurs made it clear that something important was happening. Curiosity pulled Gina closer. As she approached the glass walls, she slowed her steps, careful not to be too obvious. "New owner," she overheard one voice say. "The announcement will be made soon. Just waiting on the final signatures." "Private meeting," another voice added, a little more quietly. Everything will be different now. They've got big plans for the mall. Gina felt a chill run down her spine. The rumors of new ownership were true, and whatever this meeting was about seemed significant. But what caught her attention more than anything was the man in the red MAGA hat. There he was again. This time, he wasn't sitting alone in the food court. He was standing in the corner of the room, surrounded by well-dressed people. They were all talking to him with a strange mix of deference and admiration. They weren't treating him like just another visitor to the mall. No, these people seemed to respect him almost as if they were in awe of him. Gina leaned in closer, her eyes narrowing as she tried to get a better look. Was he a part of this meeting? Was he somehow connected to the new ownership that had been the subject of so much speculation? The man stood there, his arms casually crossed, listening to the conversations around him with a small, almost knowing smile. His presence was different now. He wasn't just some tourist passing through, he was important, and the way the others looked at him made that clear. Gina's heart began to race. Who was this man, really? Why was he here? And why had he brushed off her request to leave the mall earlier so easily? Most people would have argued or gotten angry. But not him. He had acted like he didn't even need to prove anything. Gina took a step back, retreating into the shadows of the mall hallway. Her mind was spinning with questions. Everything was starting to come together in a way that didn't make sense. The rumors about the mall's new ownership, the strange way the man had handled her request, and now this meeting, it all seemed connected somehow. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had stumbled into something much bigger than she realized. As the day continued, Gina tried to focus on her duties, but it was impossible. The questions kept swirling in her mind. Who was he? What was his role in all of this? And most importantly, why did she feel so uneasy? When her shift finally ended that evening, she walked to her car with a heavy heart. Her mind raced with thoughts of the man in the MAGA hat, the executive office meeting, and the rumors about the mall's future. She had a feeling that things were about to change, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for whatever was coming. As she drove home, the street lights flashing by in the dark, Gina couldn't shake the image of the man standing in the executive office, surrounded by people who seemed to treat him like a VIP. And then, as she pulled into her driveway, it hit her. She knew where she had seen his face before. It wasn't just some random encounter. She had seen him on the news. The man in the MAGA hat wasn't just any person. He was Elon Musk. The realization hit her like a bolt of lightning. The famous entrepreneur, the tech mogul, the billionaire. She had read about him in the papers, seen him on TV, and now, here he was standing in the mall, surrounded by executives, as if he owned the place. Gina's heart pounded in her chest. She had just kicked out Elon Musk. And she had no idea. The thought made her feel a little sick. What had she done? What kind of mistake had she made? Gina had always prided herself on being professional, on doing her job right. But this was something else. She had no idea how to fix it, how to undo the damage. As she sat in her car, staring blankly ahead, the weight of the situation settled in. Whatever was happening at the mall was bigger than she realized. And somehow, she had just played a part in it. What did this mean for her? What did it mean for the mall? The mall had started to quiet down as the day came to a close. The typical sounds of the bustling crowd, the laughter of children, the rustle of shopping bags, and the soft hum of conversations began to fade. It was that time of day when the workers started to clean up, when the lights dimmed slightly, and the usual buzz of activity started to slow. But just as Gina was beginning to relax, the atmosphere shifted. A sudden crackling sound broke through the peaceful air, followed by the unmistakable voice of a local radio personality. The voice boomed over the mall's intercom system, and instantly, the atmosphere in the building changed. The voice was familiar, but it wasn't the words that caught everyone's attention. It was the tone. There was a certain gravity to it, something that made everyone stop and listen. "Attention, shoppers," the voice began, loud and clear. "We have an important announcement. The new owner of this mall, effective immediately, is none other than Elon Musk." Gina's body went rigid. Her heart seemed to stop beating for a moment. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, pressing down on her chest. She stood frozen in place, unable to move as the voice continued in the background. "Yes, you heard it right. Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla and SpaceX, has just acquired this mall, and from now on, all operations will be under his direction." The words echoed in her mind, but her legs felt like they were made of stone. She barely heard the rest of the announcement. Her thoughts were spinning, racing back to that moment earlier in the day when she had asked the man in the MAGA hat to leave. The same man. The one who had walked out of the food court without a word, without even so much as a protest. He hadn't been upset, he hadn't argued. He had simply left. But now everything made sense. The casual way he had dismissed her request to leave, the cool, collected smile he wore, the odd air of authority he had carried with him. Gina could see it all in hindsight. She had kicked out Elon Musk. Her heart sank. The realization hit her like a tidal wave, crashing over her and pulling her down. She felt a flush of heat rise to her cheeks, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She had just told the richest man in the world, someone who now owned the mall, to leave because of a hat. Her eyes scanned the food court, searching for the man. And there he was, standing in the same corner as before. His face was relaxed, almost amused, but there was something else in his gaze. A glimmer of satisfaction. He was watching her, waiting for her to process the news. It was like he had known this moment would come. Like he had known that she would find out, sooner or later. Gina's pulse quickened. She could feel the blood rushing in her ears. She wasn't sure if she wanted to run or confront him, but either way, she knew she had to do something. She had to make this right. Without thinking, she turned on her heel and marched toward the executive office. Her heart pounded in her chest as the adrenaline coursed through her veins. She had to face this head on. She had no choice. The door to the executive office was closed, but it didn't matter. She opened it with a force that made the hinges creak, and as she stepped inside, the conversation in the room immediately stopped. The executives, all dressed in sharp suits, turned to her in surprise. But it was Elon Musk who stood out the most. He was seated at the head of the table, surrounded by a few other important-looking people, but his attention was entirely focused on Gina. And he was smiling. That damn smile. "Ms. Walker," he said, his voice calm and measured, as if nothing was wrong. "I'm glad to see you're doing your job, even if it's a little too efficiently." Gina's face turned pale. Her stomach dropped, and for a moment, she was too stunned to speak. She had no words. It felt like the floor had been pulled out from under her. All she could hear was the rush of blood in her ears, drowning out the sound of the room. She had unknowingly kicked out the new owner of the mall. The man who was now in charge of everything she had worked for. The man who was about to change everything. Elon Musk's smirk grew wider as he leaned back in his chair, looking at her with an almost bemused expression. "I have to admit, I'm impressed. You didn't hesitate at all. I guess that's what happens when you're so dedicated to maintaining order around here." Gina couldn't look away from him. Her mind was reeling, trying to process what was happening, trying to make sense of everything that had led up to this moment. How had she been so blind? How had she not recognized him? For the briefest moment, she wondered if this was some sort of joke, if someone had orchestrated the situation to make her look foolish. But no. This was real. Elon Musk was standing right in front of her, and she had kicked him out of the mall without even knowing who he was. Ms. Walker, Elon said again, his tone now less playful and more direct. I don't hold grudges, but I'd like to think that a little more caution would have been wise. After all, I do own the place now. The room was silent. The other executives looked uncomfortable, their eyes darting from one person to another. They were all waiting for Gina's response. But what could she say? What could she possibly do to make this right? She had just made a mistake that would change everything for her. The idea of fixing it seemed impossible. I'm sorry, she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. She couldn't meet his gaze. She couldn't bear the weight of the situation. I didn't know. I didn't realize who you were. Elon raised an eyebrow, but his expression softened ever so slightly. I figured as much, he said with a hint of amusement. But that's okay. It's not every day someone gets kicked out of their own mall. Gina felt her face flush with embarrassment. She wanted to run, to escape the suffocating pressure of the room, but she couldn't. She had to stand there, face him, and figure out what came next. As the moments passed in uncomfortable silence, Elon stood up from his chair. The executives around him seemed to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Elon turned to face Gina directly, his gaze intense now. You're probably wondering why I'm here, why I've taken such an interest in this place. Well, let me make it clear, I'm here because I believe in the future of malls like this one. We're going to make some big changes, and I want you to be a part of it, Gina. I want you to help me lead this place into a new era. Gina blinked, the words barely registering at first. She was still reeling from the shock of the situation. But as his words sank in, something began to click. He wasn't angry with her. He wasn't going to fire her. In fact, he wanted her to stay. He wanted her to help him change the very place she had worked at for years. Her mind raced, the possibilities swirling in front of her. Could this be a chance for her to prove herself, to rise above the ordinary life she had lived for so long? Before she could respond, Elon spoke again. But, of course, it's up to you. If you want to stay, you'll need to prove yourself. You'll need to show me that you can adapt to the changes I'm about to bring. The room seemed to hold its breath as Gina tried to absorb it all. She had kicked him out, but now he was offering her a chance. A chance to change everything. And in that moment, Gina realized that the man in the MAGA hat wasn't just a stranger. He was her new boss, the man who could either make or break her career. The next few hours at the mall passed in a blur for Gina. The rush of shock and confusion from her earlier confrontation with Elon Musk had left her feeling disoriented, almost as if she were walking through a fog. She had expected to be fired or reprimanded for her mistake, for kicking out the new owner of the mall without even realizing who he was. But instead, Elon had calmly addressed her, offering her a chance to prove herself. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something important had shifted. The entire atmosphere of the mall felt different now. The staff members, some of whom had always looked to her for guidance, were whispering behind her back. The uncertainty about the mall's future was palpable, and now that Elon Musk was in charge, everything seemed to hang in the balance. Gina was dismissed from the executive office shortly after her encounter with Elon. She was sent back to her own office, her mind racing. What was going to happen now? She couldn't help but wonder if she had just ruined her career. She had kicked out a billionaire, a man who now owned the mall. That was a mistake that could cost her everything. Sitting at her desk, Gina stared out the window. The soft hum of the mall's air conditioning and the distant sounds of shoppers filtering through the corridors seemed so distant, so unreal. She was trapped in her thoughts, unable to focus on anything other than the situation she had found herself in. As she tried to gather her thoughts and plan her next steps, a sudden knock on her office door snapped her out of her reverie. She looked up, startled, as the door slowly opened. Standing in the doorway was none other than Elon Musk himself. Her heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, she wondered if he had come to fire her, to send her packing for her mistake. But no. Instead, he looked at her with a calm, almost reassuring expression. "Gina, I wanted to speak with you," he said, stepping inside. The door clicked shut behind him, and he moved across the room with a quiet confidence that reminded her of their earlier conversation. Gina's mind was spinning. She had expected him to be angry. She had expected him to demand answers or at the very least express frustration. But now, here he was, looking at her in a way that made her feel, strangely at ease. "I just wanted to say," Elon continued, his voice smooth and clear, "you did your job. You protected the rules of this mall. And that's something I respect." Gina blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Was he complimenting her? She stood there in stunned silence for a few seconds, trying to process what he had just said. I didn't realize you were the new owner," she admitted, her voice softening. "If I had known, I never would have asked you to leave." Elon's expression softened as well, though there was still a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. "It's okay. Most people didn't know. But I'll say this, you have guts. That's the kind of people I want on my team." His words hung in the air, a quiet shock that resonated deeply within Gina. She had always been a person who followed the rules, who upheld the values of her job and her role as a manager. But now, for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had done something right. She had stood up for the policies of the mall, even though she hadn't known who the man was. She had acted quickly, with confidence, and without hesitation. And now, here was Elon Musk, one of the most powerful figures in the world, standing in her office and telling her he respected her. In that moment, everything began to change. The uncertainty, the pressure, and the fear of being fired all seemed to fade into the background. What mattered now was the future. Elon Musk wasn't just the new owner, he was the man who had the power to reshape the mall, and he was offering her a place in that transformation. Gina felt a shift in the power dynamic. It was subtle at first, but undeniable. She had no idea what the future held, but she knew one thing: she wasn't the same person who had walked into this office earlier that day. The Gina who had been so sure of herself, so certain that she would be punished for her mistake, was now replaced by someone with new possibilities. "What does this mean for me?" she asked, her voice a little shaky but full of curiosity. "I mean, what do you expect from me now?" Elon smiled, a small, reassuring smile that made her feel like she had a real chance at something new. "I expect you to lead. I expect you to help me transform this place into something bigger, something better. The mall is just the beginning. I've got big plans, and I want people like you on my side. People who are willing to stand up for what's right, even when the situation seems impossible." Gina's mind raced as she processed his words. She had never imagined that a mistake like the one she had made could lead to something like this. She had thought her career was over, but now, it seemed like it was just beginning. The possibilities were endless. And as much as the change seemed overwhelming, she couldn't ignore the excitement building within her. For the first time in a long while, Gina felt like she was truly seen. Not just as the manager of a mall, but as someone who had the potential to make a real difference. Elon Musk, a man known for changing industries and disrupting the status quo, was offering her a seat at the table. And she wasn't going to waste it. As the conversation continued, they discussed the vision for the mall. Elon shared his plans for innovation, how he wanted to revamp the retail experience, bring in new technologies, and create a space that wasn't just a shopping center, but a hub for the community. Gina was captivated by the ideas he presented, ideas that seemed so far beyond what the mall had ever been. "I want to bring in new tenants, new brands. But more than that, I want to make this mall a place that people want to visit. A place that feels alive, Not just a place where people go to buy things, Elon explained. It's about creating a destination. A place where people can gather, connect, and experience something special. Gina nodded, feeling a spark of excitement that she hadn't felt in years. The future was wide open, and for the first time, she could see herself playing a key role in shaping it. As the conversation came to a close, Elon stood up and extended his hand. Gina, I'm glad to have you on board. Let's make this place great together. She took his hand, feeling the weight of the moment. The mistake she had made, the tension of the day, had all led to this a new opportunity, a new beginning. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but she knew that whatever it was, she was ready for it. As Elon left her office, Gina sat back in her chair, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The mall was about to change, and so was she. She had a chance to prove herself, to show everyone including herself that she could rise to the challenge. And in that moment, Gina realized that sometimes, the hardest moments in life could lead to the greatest rewards. What had started as a mistake, a moment of embarrassment, had turned into a chance for growth, for transformation. And that was something she would never take for granted. The future was uncertain, but Gina Walker was no longer afraid of what was to come. She was ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. Because now, she knew she had the guts to face anything. Sometimes, a small moment, one that seems insignificant at first, can change everything. For Gina, it was a simple decision to ask a customer to leave. She had followed the rules, doing what she believed was right, without realizing the gravity of the situation. That decision, made with the firmness of someone used to handling problems, had unknowingly set in motion a chain of events that would change her life forever. For Elon Musk, that moment revealed something much deeper. It wasn't just about a hat or a policy. It was about resilience, integrity, and character, the very qualities that he valued most. While the world often looks at wealth and status as the markers of success, Elon saw something different in Gina. He saw someone who wasn't afraid to stand by her convictions, someone who, even in the face of uncertainty, could make the tough calls. In the end, it wasn't the power, wealth, or prestige that determined the course of events that day. It was the quiet strength that both Gina and Elon had, albeit in different ways, that had brought them to this point. Gina learned an important lesson that day: it's not always the loudest person in the room who holds power. Sometimes, it's the quietest, the most unassuming, who can leave the greatest impact. We live in a world where people are often judged by their outward appearances, their status, or their influence. But Gina's experience proved that true power lies in the way you carry yourself when no one is watching, in the way you handle the smallest of decisions, and in the way you stand firm when the stakes are high. In the days that followed, Gina's perception of her work and her role within the mall began to change. She realized that she didn't have to wait for permission to lead. Leadership wasn't just about a title or position, it was about influence, making a difference, and inspiring others through action. She could see now that her role wasn't just about managing a mall, it was about managing people, creating an environment where they could feel valued, where they could learn, grow, and contribute to something bigger than themselves. It was a humbling realization. Gina had spent years trying to prove herself in a system that seemed to care more about rules and policies than the people behind them. She had worked tirelessly, quietly, doing her job with dedication, but always feeling that something was missing, something that would validate her efforts, something that would show her that she had value beyond her position. She had often questioned if she was making a difference at all, if her work truly mattered. But now, she knew that every decision she made, no matter how small, was part of a larger picture. Every choice had the potential to change something, to impact someone. The most significant change, however, came from the way she saw herself. That moment, when she had asked Elon Musk to leave, had been an unexpected turning point. At first, she had doubted her actions, questioning if she had overstepped, if she had made a mistake that would cost her everything. But in reality, that moment had proven her character. She had stood up for what she believed in, even when it wasn't easy, even when it seemed like she was risking everything. And that was the quality that Elon had recognized in her. Respect the unexpected, Gina thought to herself as she walked back into the mall. Because you never know when you'll be the one who changes everything. She thought about how her life had changed in such a short time. Just a few days ago, she had been a simple mall manager, focused on the daily grind, fixing problems, calming tensions, managing the chaos of the mall. She had been so wrapped up in the routine, in the day-to-day responsibilities, that she had never imagined a moment like this. Now, she was part of something much larger. She wasn't just managing a mall anymore, she was part of a vision. Elon's vision. And she had earned her place at the table. As Gina walked through the mall, her footsteps seemed lighter. The familiar sounds of the shopping center, the buzz of conversations, the clinking of cash registers, the hum of the escalators felt different. She was no longer just a manager working in the background. She was someone with a purpose, someone who could help shape the future of this place, a place that had been her home for so long. And that gave her a sense of pride that she had never felt before. Gina looked around at the shoppers, the employees, the visitors moving through the halls. She saw them in a new light now. She realized that, just like her, each person was carrying their own story, their own hopes and fears. Each of them had the potential to change something, to make a difference in ways that might not be immediately obvious. It wasn't always about big, dramatic gestures. Sometimes, it was the small, quiet acts of courage that left the greatest impact. She thought back to the words Elon had said to her. "You have guts." It wasn't just a compliment, it was a recognition of her strength. And in a way, it was a challenge. A challenge to keep being that person who could stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. A challenge to keep growing, to keep pushing forward, to keep striving for something better, no matter the obstacles. Gina wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face it. She had learned that life was full of surprises, and that sometimes, the most unexpected moments could lead to the greatest opportunities. She had learned that the path to success wasn't always clear, but it was always there for those who were willing to take risks, to trust themselves, and to rise above their circumstances. As she continued her walk through the mall, Gina felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. She had faced the unknown, taken a chance, and come out stronger for it. She knew that, no matter what happened next, she was prepared. The future was wide open, and she was ready to embrace whatever came her way. Because sometimes, it's the unexpected moments that change everything. And sometimes, those moments lead to the greatest stories of all.